Hello and welcome. My name is Azlina Bulmer, Director of RIBA International, and I'm very pleased to host this special event for members in the Asia region with RIBA President Simon Allford. Today, Simon will be discussing his 9-point plan to transform the Institute into an open and globally engaged organization, ready to meet the needs of our contemporary international membership. The RIBA has a global professional architecture community of nearly 8,000 members based outside the United Kingdom. And it is our pleasure in the international team to support our members across the globe. We opened our first international offices in Gulf and Shanghai in December 2019. Since then, we've gone from strength to strength and increased over 3,000 new members to our international community. We are small, and our dedicated team in Shanghai does deliver an extensive program to engage and support members and partners in China. And our chapters do amazing work across the region too. In China, we launched RIBA City Rooms in Shanghai and Guangzhou last year to promote design excellence and the work of RIBA, as well as the first ever RIBA app providing learning and resources for our China audience. We've also been able to take advantage of a number of significant opportunities through the launch of our Hello China campaign, including the 100 Eminent Architects Project, the Sacred Trees Park and Wellness Center in Shenzhen, and Design Chongqing Biennale to support the city in its bid to become a UN City of Design. From the UK, we are collaborating currently with the British Council to deliver the Open Door project to promote and celebrate outstanding conservation work by emerging architects in mainland China and the UK, and launch Visions of China with the Zine magazine at RIBA last Tuesday. RIBA Asia is truly diverse, and we have around 2,500 actually chartered members in the region itself. Just a note on our wonderful member-led chapters, which is one of our very much key asset. We have 6 chapters, 4 of which are in this region. We start with China chapter, which is actually the youngest to join the group, and they are already established an annual charity cycling tour. And this year they've launched a Women in Architecture series, which will include several high-profile female architects sharing their experiences and successes. And in July, there will be an exhibition on She is an Architect at Ziwu Gallery in Shanghai, restrictions allowing, of course. Our Hong Kong chapter have always been busy and delivers an annual program of events to support members at all levels, and they've run wonderful events, including the Future Cities Children Building Workshop to celebrate World Children's Day last year. In Singapore, our local member network regularly collaborates with ArchiFest. Past events have covered diverse topics such as saving modernist heritage, food and culture, and a virtual reality of Portland Place. And RIBA members in Sri Lanka, that was established in 2017, runs an engaging program which includes Women in Architecture with AIA and the Green and Sustainability Architecture Workshop series Rising Above the Pandemic, recently by Perkins and Wills. Our chapters and the team in London are always keen to hear from members, so please do contact us, and we are here to support you. I'm now delighted to introduce Simon Allford, who became RIBA President in September 2021. Simon is a founding director of the award-winning London-based design studio Alford, Hall, Monaghan and Morris, a frequent writer, critic and advisor, currently trustee of the London School of Architecture and a visiting professor of Harvard. And now please welcome Simon Allford. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Azlina. It's a great pleasure to be speaking to you all, and I look forward to the questions and the conversation afterwards. I thought it'd be useful to talk a little bit about myself as an architect, as a way of introducing myself to you, and then I would want to talk about the RIBA. So just to give you some background, our practice is based in London. We have offices in Madrid, elsewhere in the UK and in America, and we have projects around the world, and that inevitably informs some of my thinking about practice and architecture, and therefore, as an architect and long-term member of the RIBA, what the RIBA might do to better serve architecture and the profession. So the brief intro will be, first 10 minutes will be about the things that I'm engaged with in my practice, and then the next 10 minutes about, the RIBA. And I think when you see the two together, you as practitioners and academics or combination thereof will no doubt have your own perception, and that's what today's about. It's about sharing ideas. So when I talk about the practice, I talk about constructing ideas, and obviously at the moment the greatest challenge we all face is the climate emergency, and we had our annual spring conferences of practice yesterday. There were 500 people talking about what is a low carbon future and what is the role we play in that. This is an image by Gandhi, the watercolorist artist's perspectival master, of the oeuvre of Jean Saulne. And in a way it represents an idea about a career in architecture as an assemblage of buildings. But of course, evermore it's an assemblage of places, and the RIBA is an international connector of the very different contexts in which we all work. And I think that's very relevant to the kind of practice of architecture, is this idea about the social, political, geographical context, and how that informs what we do and how we engage with our clients in the construction industry. Next. I happen to live in a city called London. I travel quite widely. I work outside of London, but probably 60% of the projects I do are in London. And this idea of the city is very important to the way my partners and founders think about the practice. And the practice has grown from 4 people to 500 over the last 30 years. And this was a map we produced as students when we worked together as students, which is all about collaborating with the city. How do we respond to the fact that it's our responsibility to make projects that some people will never enter, but they will impact upon their lives just through their existence in physical form? And how do we bring the city and the generosity of the city and its social purpose into our architecture? Next slide, please. So we believed 30 years ago, when we laid out our student manifesto, which became the basis of our practice, which was formed when we were in our mid-20s, that it was in the field of everyday building rather than public building that modern architecture has failed the city. We've always been interested in we do design art galleries and one-off projects, but we've always been interested in this idea of architecture as a background to life. Next. And we've always felt, form follows function is a much kind of abused and amused term, but we've always felt that in a sense, our programme for architecture is in a sense to create buildings that mirror the city, that allow people to adapt them and take them to another level of use when we finish. There is a disconnect that's obviously been changing over the last few years between building a building for a client, finishing it, talking about the building being complete, and only at that point does life take over. And obviously we've all, around the world been looking ever more at visiting our buildings in use, doing post-occupancy evaluations to find out how our buildings function. And of course, the biggest tension, I believe, is that we are commissioned by someone to make an architecture, but the program, we know through the study of history that the program of use of that building will change. So in projects, we are always looking for what are the permanent elements that will define architecture, that are almost regardless of program. Next. So, I think an international perspective is very important to me as a practitioner, because I export ideas to places, but I also visit those places and I import. And I think that again reflects my interest in the RIBA as a global collector of best practice, but also connector of people. Next. Work is something we speak of a lot. We are in London, where I'm based generally. We are beginning, I know that some of you are in quite severe lockdowns now, but we are beginning to bring people back to work. And we had, as I mentioned, we had our big conference yesterday, 500 people in King's Cross. And it's interesting in this post-COVID era about how the benefit of bringing people together has been almost forgotten and needs to be rediscovered. And we are encouraging people to return to work, because we think that actually gives you a better work-life balance, makes you a better architect if you are kind of traveling. Now, of course, hybrid patterns are emerging and I support those, but I do think this idea of social and physical engagement is absolutely vital, and that's the key role a building plays within the city. The city brings buildings together, and then the building itself socializes people. Next. And that's reinforced by, we are taking advantage of the World Wide Web, and we are taking advantage of the emergence of Zoom and Teams as everyday means of communicating, and it's incredibly useful. But 30 years ago, when the internet was being, invented and populated, the discussion was very much, we won't need to meet, we won't need to live in cities. But I think cities exist as essential civilizing places of discourse and communication, and that these other methods of communication will support that, but they will never replace the need for physical assets. We talk a lot about the metaverse now, but I'm a great believer in that which you can touch and occupy, which is also available to all. Next. This is this image that I've chosen from a Jacques Tati film, but it kind of represents the isolation at work of working from home. But obviously work as we see it now is quite a different place. It's a place where you go to have chance encounter and discover things that you can't discover on an endless trawl of the internet. Next. And the city, in a sense, to me, is the great connector, and it's the great memory, and it's something that is something that can always be built upon. That's a living mechanism. And in a city, in a way, as this Nolli plan shows of Rome, the streets and the public spaces are permanent. Much as we all love buildings and think they are relevant and some become listed, buildings do disappear and change. They are the grey background to the life of the city. And of course, in the modern city, the church no longer has the import it had in Renaissance Rome. So it's an interesting idea about why our buildings, regardless of whether they're for education or work or living, have an increasingly important social role to play that is beyond the benefits of those who are within them. And that's something I fundamentally believe is absolutely crucial, the social role of buildings in their community. Next. This is Guy Debord, The Naked City, and it's really just that reminder, consultation is a huge part of what we do in practice, but we all see the city differently. One of the most interesting and beneficial parts of consultation, I remember the great Will Alsop saying to me, it makes you think harder and make better buildings, is this idea that everyone's interests are not aligned, and architecture's role is to be generous enough to allow those people who are not aligned to feel somehow connected with the project you are making. Next. So I believe as architects, it is our role to construct ideas about the future inhabitation of our buildings. Ideas about the building that in a sense mirror the city. And I show this because this is Buckminster Fuller's Damaxian Dome over Upper Manhattan. But it's that idea that we are now facing the kind of challenge he was alluding to. Buckminster Fuller spoke about, a manual for spaceship Earth, and said, we'd received this wonderful mechanism, but there was no user manual. And I think we are at the moment in writing part of the user manual for the built environment to deal with the great carbon challenge we face. Next slide, please. I've always been interested in this idea that, Mies van der Rohe left Europe, moved to America, and fell in love with the idea of industrial production and promoted an idea of universal use. And here it is an idea about a vernacular that he invented to house that use, but also this idea of the public room within the city. Next. This is Patrick Geddes talking about, there is a tendency in architecture to obsess with the now and the future, but actually a brief study of history always reveals that the issues we're talking about work, place, culture, society, have long been discussed and developed and explored in the architecture around us. Next slide, please. This interests me now because we talk about, an Albertian idea about nothing need be added, nothing can be taken away. Can we make a lighter, leaner architecture? And the play we all have around the world with this idea of making things, but also using ready-made components to make bespoke products. And that, I think, is one of the great tensions that we are always thinking about in practice. How do you make something that is particular to its place, its geometry, its social context, and at the same time it's an assemblage of pieces that have been manufactured, often manufactured around the world. And again, in the carbon challenge, the greatest consideration is how do we think about that movement of goods? How do we kind of keep the benefits of it without the carbon footprint? Next slide, please. Politics and architecture. Everyone on this call will have their different view about politics. I think at its best, architecture transcends politics in that it becomes buildings for society to utilize as society sees fit. This is Giuseppe Tirani's Casa del Fascio, the House of Fascism in Como, a quite magnificent kind of Renaissance reinvention, in a modern idiom, much studied by Peter Eisenman and almost, the kind of user manual for the New York Five. But also after the war, it became the Casa del Popolo, the House of Communism. So that idea that an architecture does not necessarily carry a political ideology, but it can house people. Next slide, please. So in the practice, we talk about city rooms and the role of architecture in making a city room that is both housing the people within it, but also offering engagement, a face to the city. Next slide, please. We talk about the public promenade, and in that sense that within our buildings, regardless of programme, there is a set of routes, almost the streets through the building, that are permanent regardless of the uses that flow around them. Next. And we talk about architecture as a backdrop to the theatre of everyday life. I happen to enjoy architecture. I happen to spend my time making architecture. I happen to spend my time looking up. But to most people, architecture is a backdrop to that theatre of everyday life. And that is the kind of tension, as designers, we are always thinking about. Next. So in the practice, we talk about architecture being the theatre. Now, again, in the carbon world, when we talk about the frame, that the first thing to go up and the last thing to come down, that to us is the structure of architecture, the longevity, the piece that now, in the post-carbon era, really is almost a forever piece that needs to be generous. We talk about long life and loose fit and low carbon. Next slide. We talk about the theatre, and that, and then it houses the stage sets, and to us, that's almost the uses that will continuously change throughout the life of the building. We convert buildings, we reuse buildings. They change from being offices to educational buildings to housing across time. Those are the sort of midlife stage sets for the for the need of the contemporary moment that occur within the frame of the building. Next slide, please. And then we talk about the props. That is the furniture of life that we all bring in to allow us to continuously respond in a dynamic world to our changing needs. And that's very much a kind of guide we apply to all the projects we are undertaking, regardless of location or scale. It is also something that our clients are beginning to understand and support more. Next. So, like you, most of you, I'm a long-term member of the RIBA. I've been involved in the past as a Vice President for Education. I stood during lockdown, perhaps something of a moment of madness, but I was interested in this idea of the RIBA as a physical and virtual asset, being a place where the entire construction industry, our clients, our collaborators, our consultants, the wider diaspora of the profession. There are many people who've studied architecture who are not practicing architecture, but it becomes a place where we all can share ideas. It's a palace, a 21st century institute of ideas, a place where we are open to discourse and we are open to learning. The world can be an angry place in social media, but we are open to an idea of, by opening the doors of the RIBA, by hosting the conversation, we can make it a much more inclusive community that helps the profession evolve and respond better to the needs of society, because we can learn from each other as well as the wider construction industry. And then it becomes a place where the public and government will engage with architecture, all of course which supports our charter, the furtherance of the art of architecture in our towns and cities. Next slide, please. So my manifesto, which is what I mapped out here, has become the Biennial Plan that we are pursuing. So we talk about building a house of architecture at the RIBA. So the RIBA is second to the idea of the House of Architecture. In my 100 Days in speech, which I gave on, which is on YouTube, I talked about my interest being first, this is my personal position, first of all architecture, secondly the profession, and then, in third, the RIBA. Not to diminish the RIBA, but I think we are all interested in architecture. We are all interested in the profession that allows us to make architecture. And the RIBA, an august institute that will celebrate its 200th anniversary in 2034, but will only survive if it is relevant to both architecture and the profession. And that House of Architecture, as a physical asset, is, its headquarters is here in London, but using what we've learned through the COVID challenge is actually global communication is in much better shape, and that we can share all that goes on here online, and we can also share what goes online here. Next slide, please. I talk about making architecture accessible to all. One of the greatest challenges we face around the world is to open our profession up. And I think the RIBA can be incredibly valuable and important in that. I think the RIBA can support our members who are, all of them volunteers, but committed to the profession and opening the profession up and providing toolkits so that we go out into schools and introduce architecture. Maybe not on our own, maybe we bring a client, maybe we bring an engineer, maybe we bring a contractor. We talk about the built environment. That way we make it part of the kind of curriculum of the world in school, hosted by architecture. But that allows us then to make the profession, both people become aware of it, they might become supporters or clients in the future, and some might even choose to join the profession. And that's something really important that practice and our members can help us drive. Next slide, please. There is a thing that people tell me they've left architecture or they've dropped out. There are people who are working for contractors or for clients who feel disconnected from the RIBA. There are eminent people around the world who make wonderful projects who are not architects and not eligible to join the RIBA. We had our fellows event the other day, which was celebrating 25 people who we made honorary fellows. But I think it's really important in the post-COVID, post-Grenfell, low-carbon future that we open up the RIBA to the public, to friends of architecture, to those who've studied architecture but are now making films or working in other medium, but who still feel in their mindset that architecture is a place they value because it's a place that taught them to think about problem solving, which I think is our greatest skill. So I think it's really important that we maintain the status and help develop the status of the architect, but by opening up the profession rather than closing it down. Next slide, please. A lot of people will say to me, we've lost a lot of our authority around the world as architects. The world's a much more complex place than it was 30 years ago. But architects bring a huge value as the generalist, the collaborator, I talk about collaboratively leading the construction process. And I think that's where we need to drive our value, but not by kind of claiming lost territory through statutory protection, but through actually proving our value to the value chain of construction and helping to collaboratively lead the construction industry to an ever smarter, better place. And again, Charles Eames said, without problems, there's no design. And we are the people who can analyze and synthesize problems to find them as opportunities that sometimes might be solved by a building. And I think this is the great opportunity for us to recover lost ground, but to do so, we need to take responsibility. And the RIBA needs to help us take responsibility, capturing carbon, sharing best practice in a field that's very much changing. Next slide, please. And I think by doing this, we can then engage with government, not as a trade union, but as a learned society, as an institute of ideas that will help us, as we do locally and internationally, to help push a regulatory framework. It's the first time in my career, which has been going for about 40 years, I was 60 last year, where actually practice, certainly in terms of environmental design, is ahead of the regulatory framework in the UK. Next slide, please. An open RIBA that collaboratively leads the discourse. We held this summit. It was global, so it was housed here, but it was live around the world. We had a number of experts choosing the presentations that were submitted to be shared. They were published. The experts were not all members of the RIBA, and we made it an open call. I think, to be a strong 21st century institute, we need to be open and to be seen to be leaders who are not, a private club. That way, we can garner kind of a reputation in the public and private sector for the intelligence of our network of thinking, rather than, a grand old institute of the past, which is how people can choose to present us. I think the RIBA 2030 Climate Challenge paper has equally been a great import. Simple, legible guidance to help us all move forward. Next slide, please. I think there are models of practice at different scales in different geographical locations, but competence, confidence and cash flow is a very hard factual drive. We need to help our members who work at very different scales in very different places have the skill sets, and the way we can do that, in my opinion, is by creating, as we have, a members hub, but become a much better collector of best practice and a much better connector of people, so that the work, the intelligence exists in our members. The institute itself is not a generator of ideas. It should be kind of sharing and capturing ideas so that we can all learn from each other. This is ever more important now, because in the world of post-occupancy and low carbon design, we are all on a journey where we are going to make mistakes, and we need to report our mistakes and learn from them. Doesn't make a building a failure, but we've got a huge design challenge. Next slide, please. We have this global portal. We have one of the world's great drawing collections. I would like us to make it physically accessible, as in stored in one place, celebrated within 66, and then sent around the world. But I'd also like to make it digitally accessible, so school children and the next generation can access through our architecture.com portal. Next slide, please. We sold the MBS. We have over £100 million. We have an endowment fund, and the vision is that fund will generate an income, obviously not huge at the moment with the way the markets are, but over time it can be sustained and generate an income. So like the Graham Foundation, our members can apply to their institute to fund initiatives, whether it's events, exhibitions, seminars, research, that we then circulate back amongst ourselves. So we actually begin to help our members do the research we all need to do. Next. If we can do that, and I think we do this in various ways, but if we do this in a more coherent and better planned way, we then become a global and local meeting ground for ideas, this 21st century Institute of Ideas. Next. We become a friend to practice. We talked only this morning about the idea of kind of idealized contract, models of employment, global standards that we can circulate, not to tell our members they must follow, but to offer to them to save us all carrying out a huge amount of work on our own. We can share what are deemed to be the most successful models, because any well-run practice, will focus on developing its research and its staff to allow it to do a better job. So it becomes something that is a direct help to practice. Next. And then we become a 21st century professional institute, connecting each other and allowing us all in our own individual and different ways to address the problems as we see them with the architecture that we think is appropriate to society and our clients. Next slide, please. So, the RIBA is a global institute. It represents, international connection, of a UK-based profession that is obviously, globally relevant and connected in education and practice. We are doing that, but I think if we follow the 10-point plan that Council has signed up to, we can do it in a much more useful and economical way and become a leaner RIBA that's more focused on harnessing the intelligence of our membership. Next slide, please. It's about culture, it's about education, it's about practice, it's about lobbying and public affairs. It's not about doing more, it's about recognizing that so much is done and is lost between us. In my own practice, we find that knowledge is lost. In the profession, knowledge is lost between us in an industrial scale. A 21st Century Institute can become a kind of a huge data gatherer and sharer, and that is the ambition that I have for the Institute moving forward. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Simon. That really is really great. Lots and lots of information there, and we've got lots and lots of questions. You'd be pleased to know. It'd be a really good discussion, I think. And thank you, everyone, for posting your questions. And please continue to post as many questions, and we will try and get to as many of them as we possibly can. We're going to start with Jayendra, Bosses and Partners in Singapore. Hi, Jayendra. Hope you're well. His question is the relevance of RIBA for international member, and his view is it's of prime importance to ensure value-added engagement and support. So his question is there a plan to improve the offering to chartered and student members outside the United Kingdom?
Well, I think at the beginning, Azlina, you spoke about the work that's being done and increasingly increasing the membership. I hope and believe that we will, moving ahead, we will talk less about nations and regions and national and international, and we will talk about our membership. And there is a physical building in London that most of our members don't enjoy or visit. So I think our kind of members hub and our data gathering and sharing and building, practice toolkit support and everything else is the most crucial thing we can offer moving forward to our members wherever they are. In terms of the international, I'm a London-based architect. I'm a London-based architect who works around the world, and what I value in that is learning when I visit another country of technologies or contracts or ways of thinking that change the way I think about how I operate everywhere. And I think that's what the RIBA can do best, is harness what might be going on in Hong Kong, or Beijing, or in Sri Lanka, and actually realizing and learning from that they're addressing certain sets of issues that we are not addressing wherever we are. So I think it becomes not about national or international, it becomes about a network of ideas sharing that must be of value to our members if we are to survive.
Thanks, Simon. And then I think continuing from what you've just said, the next question is from Ken. Hi, Ken. Hope you're okay in Hong Kong. It's about relevant CPD costs. Do you think, what can we do more to create location of relevant CPD costs? I think what Ken means here is local CPD instead of the ones that we currently have on the academy. What are your views on local CPD and how we can enable that to happen more frequent than it currently does?
So I've talked about connector and collector. I think one of the dangers as a practicing architect of CPD is it's often a course format. And I actually think a conversation with a peer is also CPD. And I'm interested in I talked about the endowment fund and the foundation. I'm interested in the idea that when we create the endowment fund, that our members can come up with events and programs of knowledge exchange that become highly valued CPD. And therefore, some of them can be specific to a place, and some of them can be more generally relevant to us all. So I see a sort of a membership-driven sharing of intelligence, just as we talk about mentors and mentees within practice and indeed within academia, that I think that's a really important thing, that the RIBA allows people to construct CPD relevant to them and also find where it exists, but where it doesn't exist, become part of the invention of it.
Thanks. And still on the issue of education, and this again, I know it's from Cannes, it's about part 3, and we do, we have lots of demand of part 3 in Hong Kong and elsewhere, to be fair, and we were starting to see demand from China. I'm going to partly answer this for you, Simon, because it's an operational thing. Will RIBA consider reinstating the part 3 course in China in the near future? From operational point of view, absolutely. We're just waiting for the license to enable us to do that from the Public Security Bureau, which we hope will be in the next few months. Things are a bit slow at the moment. But I wonder whether you've got views, Simon, on international students doing part 3 and how you see part 3 adds to the education in architecture.
Okay, so everyone has different views on education. I think to make our profession more accessible, we need to return to a pre-1958 model, which doesn't mean that degrees and diplomas and masters don't exist, but it does mean potential architects of the future can develop professional qualifications through lived experience. So in the UK now we have level 6 and level 7 apprentices who are only doing 1 day a week at college, which is returning to a pre-58 model. So I am very interested in the idea that people learn at different speeds and different models of how their life is panning out to allow them to become an architect. I think part 3 is, so I'm interested in new models. The old models can exist. That's why I'm a trustee of the London School of Architecture. New models that allow for work-based learning. I think the benefit of that is twofold. One, it makes education more affordable. It also means practices. I talked about toolkits and mentoring and good practice models that the RIBA could share from good practice rather than from itself. I think those models allow practices to become more intelligent. If you take responsibility for training your staff, you are going to create more intelligent, more useful staff who will become part of the future of architectural practice. I personally regard part 3 as a very, very useful threshold. From my own personal experience, we have over 200 EU students, none of whom need to do part 3 and none of whom have to do part 3. However, we say to them, we think it's a very useful course to understand basic tenets of professionalism, in a coherent way. And a lot of them choose to take that course because they find it helps them, it accelerates their understanding of the kind of contractual and procedural operations. I think those contractual procedural operations are as relevant in Europe, America, in the Middle and Far East as they are specific to London. They are about good codes of practice rather than an obsession with the detail of UK contract law. So I'm a big fan of us continuing to offer part 3 around the world.
And continuing this academic on CP, going back to CPD, we've got a question from John Leto, who is at XJTLU in Shanghai, and also one of our committee members on China chapter. And John attended an ARB session last week regarding the mandatory recording of CPD. Like your view, can you give us assurance of there being a single platform where we are not duplicating?
I can't give the assurance because I'm not ARB. I can assure you, I had a meeting last week with the CEO and chairman of ARB, with Jack Pringle, the chair of board here, and talked about avoiding duplication at all costs. And that ARB confirms, at the moment they do not have ambitions to run CPD, but they will want to understand people's CPD platforms, and we're saying, within the constraints of GDPR and our database, trying to make it what we do and what CPD we support is easily communicated to by the individual architect without them having to do a sort of second set of paperwork. So, we are both currently committed to avoiding duplication in CPD and all other engagements we have with them.
Coming back to Ken, thank you for that, Simon. Come back to Ken, and we all are very supportive of awards, which is one of RIBA's massive plus, and we're going through the national awards at the moment for some fantastic building and zoning this, focusing this for Asia and Australasia. Ken would like to know whether we would support a regional design awards for Asia and Australasia.
We have the RIBA regional and national awards in the UK. We have the international award. I would be very interested in the idea. I think awards are not just a nice celebration. They are a way of capturing and sharing best practice, which is why we've got all the awards, national winners giving online lectures where the architect and their client or their engineer choose to talk about what they've done and why they've done it. And again, online being important. So I am very supportive of that principle of, an ever-expanding global capturing and sharing of best practice. So yes, in principle, I'm happy to discuss with yourself and Denise Bennett, who chairs the awards group. I think awards are not, there's too many awards, but the RIBA awards are incredibly thorough. Where people visit buildings. It sounds ridiculous, but a lot of awards are done on sort of Instagram. They visit buildings. We review the carbon. We look at occupation. They set a global standard, and I'd be a big fan for that accessibility and celebration, understanding of what you might be doing in Hong Kong or elsewhere differently to how it's done in the UK. I think that would be a great thing, and very happy to pick up outside this meeting.
Thanks, Simon. And again, about celebration here, going back to your presentation on the House of Architecture. This is a question from Anonymous. Very interested to hear about the plans for the House of Architecture in Portland Place, but not clear about how this will help with the international regions and architects overseas. Okay, so to be very clear, the RIBA has a building here. It's had it here for approaching 100 years. This building is not an asset we can ever sell. It is only allowed to be used for the next 900 years as a home for architecture. So this building is an asset we must utilise, which is why we will have a plan to make it physically upgraded to deal with a listed building, but carbon and disabled access to make it accessible to all. So this building will need to be renovated, and as part of that renovation, we want to create a kind of intranet that connect to the internet, where what goes on in this building is simultaneously shared either live or on YouTube the next day. So the debate and discourse in this global city is shared with our members around the world. Simultaneously, through architecture.com and through the lecture and events program, moving ahead, I'd like to make it much easier for all of us to share what we are doing locally with each other. I have been on numerous calls where people are thousands of miles apart now, but at the same lecture or in the same discourse. And that is something that we can build through our platforms here. So that is where I think we bring the value of the RIBA is the global Institute of Ideas that has an online presence as well as a physical presence. Thanks, Simon. A great question coming from students at Department of Architecture and Design at XJTLU School in China. So their question is, what do they get from joining as an international student member? And can the RIBA create networks for RIBA schools overseas to be more part of the family of RIBA schools in the UK? So connecting the two, so this is going back to your idea of connectivity. The students there would hope that RIBA could encourage, promote more activities, engagement and feeling of belonging for our international student body. Okay, the first question is a slightly technical question about what do you get? Do you want to reply to that, Azlina, before I talk about the more? Sure. Yeah, sure. I think there's quite a significant benefits. Student members obviously join us for free from validated schools. They're very supported. We run quite a number of events and where we connect one school to another. We ran the global photography competition last year. We also did a specific global student competition where we encouraged students from all over the world to respond to a brief. And we do encourage our local chapters to also work with schools, and I know they do that very well in China, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Sri Lanka. So there's lots going on, but I know there's a lot more that we would like to do. There's other benefits in terms of CPD, engagement with wider practices as well. So that's what we are currently doing, but we are obviously constantly reviewing how we can better support our student members and other classes.
I mean, I think there's an interesting one. We validate, I think it's 120 schools around the world, but in these student medals, which again is an award, which is a celebration, I think we invite over 400 global practices. So as an institute, we are looking to be beyond our self-interest, which is to promote those schools that we validate, to actually have a much broader engagement to understand architectural education around the world and connect schools and students together. And I think that's something we need to work ever harder on. But I think it is not always about the schools that we validate. It's about actually a broader idea about our leading role in validating architectural education and supporting it. And you know, our gold, our bronze and silver medals, as well as our research and thesis medals, are, I think, an extraordinary capturing and sharing online of the different interests that schools are exploring around the world that allow schools to assess their own role in the broader picture. So I think, you know, we are doing a lot of good work there, but we could do ever more.
Yeah, I totally agree, Simon. And also to remind students, don't forget there's plenty of scholarships and also opportunities to be part for the other research awards that we do. And we always encourage you to do that and reach out to us if you've got any questions to support. And next question is from Rufina, who is our chair of our Hong Kong chapter. Hi, Rufina. Rufina says, thanks, Simon, for the inspiring presentation. I believe applied research is paramount for advancing the profession, and more so now to contribute to the climate action and post-pandemic architecture. It is encouraging to hear about the endowment fund. Hope to see more details soon, and I hope it will be open to all RIBA members globally.
Thank you for those words of encouragement and support. I know that everything I do in practice is being mirrored by other good work, some the same and some different by other practices. And I think, you know, we have a climate action group, and one of their tasks is to work out what do we do to help our members. The world is changing quite dramatically in terms of the materials, the way we contract, the way we assess transport mileage, these, you know, the way we look at embodied and operational carbon. And I think what we need to be doing is almost publishing much more and creating more events around what we are all learning. And that to me is crucial, the sharing of knowledge between us, because I think it is in practice and academic research that the work is being done. And we need to, and also some of that work will be contradictory, and there will be different champions for different ways of working. And we shouldn't make the call as to which one we agree with. We should allow the discourse in the profession to be shared internationally, and for us to actually look at the different ways people are thinking about using materials and new material technologies as well as old. So I'm fully supportive of this idea of an international exchange of best thinking, but allow the individual architect to decide what is best thinking.
Thanks, Simon. There's a question, it's an interesting question here, and I will partly answer this. And it's from Anonymous. Through the pandemic, are there any resources the RIBA could share that might be of use to local practices and individuals? And can there be more information in different languages? Sometimes it is very hard to translate the information on websites in English. And yes, absolutely. There's lots and lots of information on our RIBA website on architecture.com. However, I absolutely accept that it's not easily accessible in China, hence why we've got a RIBA China app. So if you are in China, you haven't signed up to our app, please do so. That will enable you to access resources, some of which are already translated in Mandarin. Lots of information on our website, architecture.com, are not readily translate already, but if you do need those in different languages, please contact my team directly and we will do the translation and send relevant information across. But Simon, I'm just wondering, you know, as a global organization, is your view that we now must reach out in different modes, different channels, and that include languages as well?
I think that the language one is always going to be tricky, because the more languages you add, the more you exclude the other language that you haven't added. I'm not being too glib about that. So that's something, Azlina, that, you know, we should discuss as a team and see what is actually affordable. The danger is the RIBA does too many things and ends up, you know, not doing anything particularly well. Clearly, you know, we will need to decide what languages we can reach out in. I also think there is a slight thing that I know that some of you are in quite a severe lockdown, which we're not in central London. In something dynamic like COVID, I'm not sure the centre is the best place to communicate practice, because how can what I might be experiencing be relevant to what you might be experiencing? And again, I'm sort of a bigger fan of the dynamic world of, you know, we've all as practices, in both in terms of how we engage with our clients, but also how we engage with our own offices, have worked out different ways, different hybrid models. And again, I think the membership hub is a place where we could be sharing that more. And that itself, presumably, can actually, the membership hub can have geographical locations where local languages can be used to communicate between architects who are almost learning on the spot in something as severe and dynamic as a pandemic.
Yes, thank you. And still on the pandemic, and this is probably just an observation because we've answered the question there. Ken wants to know, would RIBA support members in China who encounter hardship owing to severe lockdown by reducing membership fees? I know my team has put in a link under Join the RIBA with reduced fees on the membership page. If there are any questions on that, please let us know. But we are here to support, and there is currently already a process in place that members who do suffer hardship to get a reduction in fees. I hope that's useful for that, Ken, and also other colleagues in China. Next question is from sorry, I'm just going to look at the translation. So thank you for question from China, and Jane, thank you for translating this. The question is, what's your take, Simon, on bionic architecture?
I'm not sure what bionic architecture is. I'm reading a lot about the metaverse, and my take on that is it's interesting, but I'm not sure it's the future, or if it is, it's a slightly depressing future of a virtual world. Without asking a question back, by bionic, what do you mean? Maybe
yeah, we'll wait. I think it's from Albert. Albert, if you come back to us and just define that further, I will, you know, we can then help you on that one. And there was also a question from Ronald. Hi, Ronald, from Singapore. Also on our chapter there, and co-editor of Singapore Architect magazine. Ronald here asked, many local chapter members are simultaneously members of RIBA and Local Institute. For Singapore is the SIA, of course. Locally, we are pitching inter-institute partnerships and collaboration as part of relationship building. Our counterparts at SIA are interested in broadly learning from RIBA HQ's experience in such diverse topics of fee, diving, procurement, and etc. So he wants us to confirm that RIBA is open to and welcomes institute-to-institute collaboration and sharing. Ronald, I'm going to pass on to Simon, but just to reassure you, international relations at RIBA has never been busier. And we are always delighted to work with our sister institutes all over the world. And I know Simon is very much engaged in that, and you will be attending the UIA extraordinary meeting in Madrid very soon as well. But I'm going to hand over to Simon to also answer that.
Yes, hi, nice to meet you. I have a view that the RIBA will flourish because it's relevant to what we all do, not because it's protective. If you're protective, it's because you're already in retreat. I think the profession flourishes when we share information with each other through publishing, through seminars, through education, through CPD. So, you know, I have meetings all the time with other institutes, the ICE, you know, the iStructi, and other architectural global institutes. The RIBA is only relevant because it's a historical and well-established membership network, and opening ourselves up and becoming what I've talked about, being a generous host, which is why our Built Environment Summit was open to anyone, not to RIBA members, and why our judges, you know, our expert panel was open to the experts. And indeed, within council, we've talked about expert advisory groups to connect council to the profession, but open for them to invite people in who have relevant skills. Yeah, that's what we should be about, not about being protective. So I'm completely keen. I think, in fact, it's essential to our future to be open and to help, as I call it, collaboratively lead the discourse.
Thank you,
and learn from others.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I know we're coming out to the end of our time, but just one last question. I know this is one that you're very close to as well and passionate about, which is about climate challenge and climate emergency. This question here: how is the RIBA supporting architects to deal with the climate emergency? There are different regulations and requirements for buildings in Asia. Is it possible to be recognized through RIBA policies? And how can members with careers in Asia find relevance to buy into this from London?
Obviously, the climate challenge ignores international boundaries, but we as practitioners have local regulatory guidance, or, you know, mandatory, some guidance, some mandatory statutory instruction. That around the world will be quite different, and levels of ambition we find as a practice who work around the world are quite different. That's why the RIBA 2030 Climate Challenge is written in terms of scientific measures, such as kilograms of carbon a metre squared, kilowatt hours, etc., in terms of operational energy. So I think the RIBA's role there is not to decipher or create an international band of regulations, but to create easily understood, scientific, measurable targets, which is what we are doing, that are applicable regardless of where you are. And in some places, they might be way beyond statutory guidance or mandatory guidance. And you might say to your clients, we don't need to do this, but this is what we think is best practice, and it's been set by the RIBA, and it's a globally relevant standard by a globally relevant organisation. We in London are certainly using the RIBA's guidance to help our clients be much more ambitious and take responsibility. And of course, I think post-pandemic, there is much, much greater client awareness. So I think, you know, that's the important role we have, is to set a standard that we need to keep improving. And we need to kind of build from that standard into knowledge sharing to help us all know how we have achieved that standards in buildings.
Thank you, Simon. I think that's a really good way to end today's session. I know we haven't got too many questions. Just to reassure our audience, we will get to your question. We'll reply to it individually where you put your name down. But please continue to get in touch with our RIBA and the international team if you have any questions, if you need any support. Simon, I'm keen to give you the last words. Is there anything you want to say before we close?
On a simple technical level, we will pick up the bionic question when it comes through. So sorry to have not answered that one. And on a more general level, it's very, very useful and enjoyable and informative to be asked these questions. It's, you know, and I hope to meet you all in person wherever you are, or indeed, you know, if you're in London in due course. You know, I have been outside the RIBA for many years whilst always being a member. I think there's a really vital role for us, and your feedback as international members is incredibly useful. But I think the RIBA at its best becomes a global driver of standards, but driven by us, the members, not by an institute at its centre. So this global membership, to me, we should, in due course, break down these barriers. We are an institute serving architects around the world through the excellence of our knowledge that we are sharing. But thank you all very much for today. It's been very useful and informative.
Thank you, Simon, for your time. Thank you, audience. Until next time, stay safe and take care.
Bye, everyone.